So, Natalie, we're already live. So, whenever you'd like, you can start. I think you're mute, Natalie.
Oh, sorry. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming and joining us for this panel discussion. We are Alteras. We are a London-based collective interested in everything and complex issues surrounding the environment. And we are going to talk about experiences in lockdown. I'm Natalie Mai. I'm a visual artist based in Berlin. And I'm going to mediate today with my colleague Tara Schatz, who is a visual artist in London and a curator. Our guests will talk from their perspectives and their various backgrounds in professions as artists, as health data scientists, journalists, working in second education, hospitality and tourism. And I'm going to introduce them to you now. So Roman Studer is today with us, and he's a senior bioinformatic data scientist. Hi, Romain. Romain did a PhD in biology with a focus on bioinformatics in Switzerland, postgrad doc in London, and followed by a second postdoc in Cambridge. He's now working with Benevolent AI, a private company in London that uses AI to search for medical treatments and solutions. Romain, do you want to add anything to that for the introduction?
No, that's quite precise.
Okay.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thanks for coming. With us also today is Parizad Nobakht. She's an Iranian artist and BBC Persian news anchor, and with a passion for printmaking and expressive arts. Parizad, do you want to introduce yourself a bit?
Hi. Thank you very much for having me. As you said, I'm a journalist and broadcaster, and I think I use art to kind of express what I can't usually express through my line of work, and that's what I do.
Thank you, Parizad. With us as well is Giuseppe Mario Urso. He is an Italian conceptual artist who works in St. Paul's Girls' School. And Giuseppe, do you want to tell us a little bit more about you and your two professions?
Well, I'm here mainly as an artist, and I'm quite interested in change perception. And this is what I work on. I work often with icons and try to modify a bit the perception of that classic icon. I think at the moment with the new reality is a quite challenging kind of approach. Quite interesting. And then at the other end, I work at school, and then I see how the reality, the coronavirus affect this sector quite a lot. Thank you for having invited me to this.
Thank you for the introduction. And we also have today Paul Hindle. He's a musician and artist and works in central London tourist destinations. Paul, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Hi. Well, yeah. I studied at the RCA in 2005, and generally my artistic practice is generally modelling, assemblage, lots of different materials. Won't go into more detail, but currently integrating another side of being a musician in with that work as well. I should probably touch on later, actually. But yeah, I also work in the tourist industry as well. And obviously that's been very badly affected. So it'll be interesting to see what we discuss about that. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, I agree with you. It will be interesting to talk about that. Yeah, thank you, Paul. And then we also have Ludmila Sigismondo. She is an Argentinian artist that has vast experience working in pubs and restaurants close to Covent Garden. Ludmila, do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, I'm Argentinian. I'm a visual artist from Rosario. Yes, I've been working as well portraits. Nowadays, I'm trying to do animation, visual effects. So I'm trying to do another path in my career. Yes, I worked for 3 years in a restaurant in Covent Garden. So I saw the effect of the pandemic very badly.
Thank you, Ludmila. For our audience, we are happy to take questions, and please feel free to write them in the chat, and we can, in the second half, we'll come back to that. But first, we will now address some questions to the participants.
Thank you, Natalie, for the vast introduction. And so as Natalie was mentioning, I'm Terechat, and I would like to start asking each one of our speakers, how has lockdown affected their creativity? So I was wondering, Parizad, if you would like to expand a bit on this topic.
Sure. Well, I can see that it's kind of affected in different categories. Like content-wise, I can see that I've gone a bit doom and gloom, which is kind of expected in the pandemic. With the logistics of it, in the beginning when the pandemic started, I thought that I'm left with plenty of time to kind of do whatever I like. And I was quite excited about that. But after a while, I noticed that, the more time I have, the less I do. So I thought that I should do something about it. And what I did was I tried to kind of limit the time that I have, which might sound strange, but I try to kind of allocate times to kind of come up with habits that I have to do during the day so that I take away some of the time. So I'm left with less time. And when I allocate that less time that I have to doing art, which I really like, then it gives me joy. So I started with like allocating time for exercise, allocating time to learning Spanish, allocating time to reading books that I have to read for my work. And then doing that has actually helped me. And then I've noticed that the other thing is, which has changed quite a lot during the pandemic, is the material that I use, because obviously, the shops are not available, and I do have a very limited space because I don't have a studio. I work at home and I have a tiny space. So I've started exploring with like paper and doing more paper cuts, more collages, and doing painting on collages and things like that, which I haven't done before, which is kind of exciting as well. So that's how I do that. And it's obviously it has affected me a bit, but I try to allocate time to be creative, so that I try to be creative and I don't leave it to chance.
So thank you, Parizad. I also think that Ludmila has adapted her practice in terms of materials. Would you like to expand a bit more, Ludmila, of how do you feel that lockdown has affected your creativity?
Yes, it did affect to me. I mean, I felt a bit sad a few days, but I tried, be organized and finish my projects. And when I did a course in concept art, so in the meantime of the pandemic, so I could finish my portfolio in concept art. Now, currently, I'm doing a course with the TISA University. So I'm studying 3D animation, compositing. So it really changed the pandemic with my practice, because now it's more digital. So, but I'm happy with that. As well, I changed. I was working in a restaurant. I'm in furlough, but I started working in a hospital for the NHS. I'm administrator in the COVID ward, so I have close contact with COVID patients, which is very hard because every day many people die. And I'm happy that now that many people that we don't have many patients as before. So it's like great news. So we can see the light at the end, isn't it? Maybe next week we are going to be a green ward. That is mean we are not going to accept any more COVID patients. So we are going to be only normal patients. Another wards is many patients less. So yes, I hope maybe in summer will be this over.
So thanks, Ludmila. So going up with the COVID patients, I would like to know how creativity has been affected for Romain, because normally we don't see like scientific or scientists as maybe like a literal creative job, but I do think it involves a lot of creativity. So how would you say that your creativity has been affected?
Yeah, it's true. It's we need some creativity, and the thing as we are working in the company, we are working in the large open space. So with a lot of employees working on different fields, like in chemistry, bioinformatics. So it's all on computers. We have also mathematicians, and being all in the same place, it's allowed to have a lot of spontaneous discussions or like short meetings. And being remote now, it's a bit more difficult. So for this kind of spontaneity, so you need to prepare a meeting and just connect on Zoom or other applications. And yeah, it's these kind of things.
Well, actually, what you mentioned about being spontaneous is actually one of the things we've been like for near 2 months planning for this panel, because the format of the Zoom makes it quite hard to have a kind of like fluid conversation.
Yeah,
you say you need to plan it more, and also you kind of like can't read how the other people are feeling. Whereas when you're in a room, you have a sense of empathy with the other ones.
Yeah, it's also you cannot read the body language, and so it's large meetings are more difficult. And also, for example, if I'm working on my project and suddenly I need to see a colleague, I can just walk across the office, while remotely it's a bit more difficult because I don't know if he's in a meeting or not.
Yeah, and thinking about being spontaneous, I would like to ask Giuseppe, who is involved in secondary education, how has lockdown affected, well, your creativity as an artist, but also how do you see it for secondary students?
Well, that is quite strange for the student because, to do everything from home. But even happened when we start the year, we went back to school, and the school was not the same. And it was quite strange, interesting. I'm quite interesting to see the space and the desecration of the space. At the school, because the priority was protect children, students, there were no rules. It looks like, during the war when beautiful stately home became hospitals, where, something that was kept precious became not relevant. And in our school, we have a great hall that is a listed room and was transformed for the youth. We didn't damage the building, but everything changed. The space was divided to keep year groups separate, and everything was like a sort of prison, but was very fluid. But everything changed. This is quite shocking. I remember one picture from Italy that really moved me a lot about space and how the use of the space. It was a beautiful small church, a Baroque church that was transformed in a school, in a classroom. And I thought this is quite bizarre if you think. because this happened only during war. And from the creative point of view, it's true that we have more time because there is nothing to do. But it's also good that we have some problem to collect materials, because now I can buy only on Amazon or eBay, because I use a lot of ready-made souvenir objects for my composition, my pastiche. And this is not very good, because I prefer to see the object and so on. But from the other side, you are more free. You have to compensate with creativity. And about the fact using Zoom, I have a beautiful experience that I share with Tere. When me, Tere, and another artist, Cesar Baraka, we work for a project together. Doing Zoom was magical. Well, we use maybe WhatsApp, I don't remember. But we talk, we create together in synergy that is normal. But our meeting lasts 3 days because we got off, on, off, on. When normal meeting, you will do an hour and then you carry on the project on your own. And I thought that the process was beautiful, more than the object we thought to create. And I think this new way to approach people can give you a lot of freedom as well, and stimulation to your creativity. We have to see the positive element as well.
I like what you mentioned about how the lack of access to resources makes you more creative. So I would like to then ask Paul, because Paul, I know that you work a lot with a sculpture, and I wanted to know, how do you feel your creativity has been affected during lockdown?
Yeah, actually, I was going to touch on that. Well, the first thing is it's allowed me more time to work on my practice, which is great. I work full time normally, so time is an issue. But I did find, like Parizad said, you have to allot time as well. When I started, when all this started, I was working from home, and we had to develop projects through based on the place I work. So I was able to basically just self-directed study and remain creative in that form. But we also had the structure of a working day as 9 to 5. So that was good. And we had catch-up Zoom meetings morning and afternoon as well, which meant we were exchanging ideas and actually having a structure set up to work to. So that was a great basis for doing something like that. And then, of course, after that, we became furloughed. So there was no time constraints there. But then, obviously, my own work then followed the same format. So I was basically structuring my day, even writing a sort of chores list out, get up at this time, do this for, usually I'll work on music in the morning, and that will go on to a certain point, and then I'll make sure I break off and do something else. And so that was something that's positive. But as far as materials, I don't have a studio as well. I work at home, and I, using something that's always affected my work is I tend to overthink things, and I'm quite good at engineering solutions to problems. So I can pretty much decide how I'm going to go about something and then realize it. And I've always felt that my work suffers from that, and I just can't let it go. I need to keep overworking these things. So the problem with having access to materials, I'm actually making do now with whatever comes to hand. So if I can't find what I would have liked to have used for the project, then it becomes what's there. What do I have lying around in the flat that I could make do with? What tools have I got here that I can use without access to any bigger machinery or whatever? So in that way, it's actually really developing my practice. It's great.
Well, thank you, Paul. Now I would like to really shift a bit the subject, because for most of the people, COVID has meant to shift from a very active life to a kind of like more quiet life. but I guess for people in the medical or scientific or biological industry, it has been quite different. And normally scientists tend to be inside a lab and had a kind of like a quieter life. And that's why I would like to ask Romain, how would you describe your experience of working on a company that has been researching about medical treatment related to COVID, when actually the public health has become mainstream? Because suddenly, like something that was very aside media, it became mainstream. How has that affected your work?
It's something very exciting, because we are, as a company, we are developing tools to analyze and to inquire data. And suddenly we have this pandemic that came, and the increase of genomic data and about this virus. So we were able to utilize our tools to see if we can find a potential treatment for this disease. And in 1 week, our team managed to find one current drug that is currently existed, but for another disease. We were able to say that this drug could be helpful and might relieve some patients. And then we were able to contact the pharmaceutical companies that is actually producing this drug to start some clinical trials. And then we have the ability to see all along the years that if the trial will be effective or not. And that was very interesting.
But then you use then artificial intelligence, so like to cross and to see how other medical treatments could work for a new disease. That's actually quite interesting how it works.
Yeah, exactly. So
normally, how much would that have taken if it was like a human lab, the one who was researching?
Oh, yeah. So yeah, the thing is, our intelligent artificials is doing many different things, but one is to screen and read all the scientific publications, which is like millions of different papers, and try to find some link between drugs, between disease, and between protein in humans, and to create some network and interactions. And then we are able to do some query, and we know what the virus could do and what could be the potential effect in the human biology and what we could target. And then we found some, some drugs that were doing these things we would expect. So, and the thing we were able to do it in a faster way that's possible than before. So.
And
thank you, Romain.
This AI, the way to find the data and to match them, is this like because it's a big thing in the arts nowadays, like to use data scraping?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So also somebody who works very attached towards normally to the public interest. But also became public interest are journalists in this time, because the informations were constantly changing, but the news needs have this duty in the common mind to serve, to nourish us, and to make us understand. So, in your work as a journalist, Parizad, how did this constant change of flow of information impact your ability to report on current affairs?
Well, to be honest, since it is news, you always have the flow of information. But what COVID kind of proved was, like, especially in the beginning, when there were lots of, rumors around, and there were lots of unreliable sources around, we could actually feel the need that how people need to have reliable sources to tell them what to do, what is dangerous, what is not, what is fact, what is not. And with the logistics of doing that, obviously has changed quite quite a bit drastically. I'm at the office now, so some of us still have to come in. But this massive building that the BBC is and was locating like around 6,000 people. Now, when you come into it, it's literally deserted. And there are a few of us around. Most of the people are working from home. And since this industry is it's all teamwork. Even if you're making a report, one person provides the information, the other person does the footage, the other person does, I don't know, putting it together, and somebody checks the text, somebody does that. So it's always teamwork, especially for TV. So I've seen that being affected quite a lot. We are adapting. There are people working on a specific report, like 3 people, 2 people working at the same time. You can see like people sometimes, we need to do voiceovers, we need to translate things. So, there's been times that you have to call like 10 people on the phone, on WhatsApp, trying to get them to kind of read what you want them to read and get different voices on. And with actually the practicality of the job has changed quite a lot as well, because previously it would have been, everybody was thinking about, if you're putting a report together, you would think about where to go, who to interview, how to do it, about the angles and things like that. But then at the moment, you don't have the freedom of go and shoot wherever you want or go and talk to whoever you want to. So obviously things are limited. And when things get limited, then you have to go more creative, because obviously the footage gets boring, and you want to, obviously, as part of the job is to make things pleasing for the audiences to watch. So that is where the creativity comes in, and sometimes you get stuck. And with the visuals, we try to get more use of more graphics, use of trying to come up with visualizations inside the room that the presenter or a reporter is sitting, and things like that. But that's it. So it's changed quite a lot. But still, some of us still have to come in and provide the news that everybody needs to rely on.
Yes, like I imagine that it's making television. Normally, you assume it is like this group thing, and people come together, and now it's like in this little bubbles somehow.
Exactly, and it's usually okay when you know the people that you need to work with, but when you don't know the people you need to work with. But I do remember that at the time when we didn't have COVID, you would walk into the corridor, and then you would see this person who is the boss of whichever section. And if you needed to kind of brainstorm in whatever section it was, then you could kind of get a minute or two with that person while the person was working. But you've lost that chance, which is kind of a missed connection at the moment. Still, there are ways you can still find the person, but it's those bits which are missing. And I kind of feel that in my personal workspace, that connection is lost, and it is an important bit.
So thank you, Parizad. And thinking about connection and exposure, because maybe people who work in the media, especially journalists, are constantly being exposed to the audience. But another industry which is also being exposed to the audience, but maybe we not immediately think it in that way because it's a more kind of like a direct exposure, is the tourist sector. So I would like to ask Paul, do you fear being exposed to the virus by other people when you're in the line of work?
Yes. There are certain parts, parts of my workspace that are quite enclosed. I mean, necessarily when we were open and the virus was around, we were in those areas. But also in that way, it was a bit worrying. I think the worry eased slightly as time went on, and we didn't know anyone who'd caught the virus as far as we knew, or wasn't badly affected. But also being in a workspace, you also have authority over those people who are coming into that space, and there is a respect there, which is put into practice many times, where I'd see someone approaching me from what we'd call a safe distance, and they'd have the mask hanging down on the chin, and I'd say, "Oh, excuse me, could you put your mask on properly, please?" Or can you put your mask on, if you saw that they had one. Obviously, we're accepting exemptions, so if you saw somebody without the mask on completely, then you have to assume, and then we'd be given there'd be enough time to maybe move out of the way, so that didn't feel too bad in that way. But obviously, having that authority to be able to ask someone to comply to what we all feel we need to, as the research is telling us, was quite reassuring, and it enabled a bit of control over the situation. Sometimes that wasn't always possible, but mostly, and come through unscathed so far. And now, not currently, the building is completely closed to the public, so don't have to face that at the moment. For some help. I think the biggest, just to touch back on that, the biggest worry was traveling to the workspace. I don't know if other people have found a similar thing. I ended up purchasing a new bicycle to be able to do that on my own without having to be close. It felt like the biggest danger was actually traveling to the workplace rather than actually being inside it.
Yeah, thank you for this, Ludmila. With laws and restrictions constantly changing, how do you deal with resource waste in your job?
Well, when I was working in the restaurant, the management took some measures like extra cleaning, deep cleaning all the time. We changed the menus, like disposables. Then we changed the direction of the entrance and exit. Then some people stay in furlough. Others came back part-time. So we reduced the menu as well. So that you avoid, not that much food waste, because we have even we were open, we didn't have that much customers. I mean, maybe a few tables. Once I remember 10 bookings, when in the past we have maybe 400 bookings. So it was a big change for us, for the restaurant. It's a bit sad to see that change, because of course you can see how the sales change, and then you can keep those workers, I think they manage very well, because there are many people that is still in furlough, because other companies they close down. But I hope everything gets better. I think if you have a terrace, maybe you have more chances to work safely. But it was as well an issue to prevent people not wearing the mask or this kind of stuff. As well, that rule about the alcohol, it was quite difficult to manage. It was a meal, and you can have one drink, alcohol drink. It was difficult to manage that as well. Customers, they were a bit reasonable, but because people, they want to go out and drink, have a meal as well, which is sometimes expensive. So I think now I think it's going to be better in the future when we open. Let's see.
People come back.
Yeah. I hope so.
Yeah. So Parizad, how would you evaluate the role of the media during this pandemic? Should the media be blamed for worsening the situation to any extent?
I don't think so. In what way do you think worsening? No, I don't think so. I think the media was quite responsible for giving the news that people need to hear, rather than trying to kind of make the situation look worse than what it is. It's bad already, and everybody was afraid, and trying to kind of get that panic under the control was quite important, I think, so that everybody could continue with their lives, still have a reasonable fear, but not to be crippled with that fear. And I think that was an important role for the media, and it was kind of an experience to kind of live that.
Yeah, I can imagine. I cannot imagine, but.
But in terms of Parizad, I would like you to expand a bit more in that, because there's been lots of like fake news and some people being really paranoid about things. And
well, that's the thing, because fake news is not news, is it? I don't know. So that's the change. That's the kind of boundary that we need to kind of see into. So if it is fake news as opposed to news, I don't know, because there are some reasonable places that you go to for getting your news, right? So if you go to, obviously there is social media and some reliable places, some reliable news kind of platforms are on social media as well. But what I see as fake news is like in some countries, like in India or Brazil, or I don't know, even in Iran, which I'm from, there are lots of information, especially rotating on social media, that I don't know, like if you have fried potato, it might prevent you getting COVID because of this and that. So obviously it's I think down to the person who is consuming, who is the consumer of the media, to know what is reliable and what is not. And it's sometimes it is really tough, because obviously you can't expect everyone to know. And that's where the big media come in. And that's the role of I think that some media even do have the responsibility of educating people, of trying to kind of, because obviously your audiences, you can't tell who your audience is, what information they have access to, what they have read, what they haven't read, and trying to kind of differentiate between the myth and the truth, and try to, even if that is a strong one, if that's a strong myth which is circulating, then even you do have the obligation to kind of bring it to the notice, to mention that this is what you've heard on social media, but due to this and this and this, and due to what scientists say and what has been reported by this and this and this media, this is not true. And then perhaps have it negotiated with doctors or scientists and specialists who know better than journalists, so that they can put it into perspective. But it's that's the differentiation that we need to make. So when we say news, when I say news, at least, I mean like real news media or organizations, like, I don't know, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the BBC, the Guardian. So that's what I call news. And the rest, which is circulating, then we need to see what the source is, to kind of see where it comes from. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, of course. I think that's actually a quite interesting topic to discuss in the way, because as an audience and not as someone from the media, you're constantly being bombarded with so many information that you actually sometimes it's really difficult to distinguish if what you're receiving is actually true or not. And so thinking about facts, I would like to ask Roman, because I understand that in your company, there was a team who developed a medicine that is a successful treatment for bilateral effects of COVID-19. So is there anything particular you would like to highlight of this medicine, or the process, or how it has worked?
Yeah, it's a bit what I explained. So with our technology, we were able to do like, it takes a small team in our company to work like 1 week, 2 weeks on it to identify a subset of molecules that could work. And then they contacted the different companies to see if we could do some clinical trials, to see if we could help and relieve the patients that get this disease. And we found on a very small cohort of patients that it helped a bit. So, and then it was expanded to larger clinical trials as we progress. So, but yet it was quite successful. It's not a cure that you will take and you will relieve the next day. So, but it helps for some patients. So, and I would like also to point back on the topic of fake news versus news. There's also one problem is even in science, sometimes you don't know the truth. You can read an article that will tell you something, and the next month or the next year, you will read an article that will tell you the opposite, because either the data was analyzed in a different ways, or because scientific did the wrong things, so that could happen. Either it's normal or sometimes it's just very flawed studies. And also for the public, it can be difficult to understand that science is not always black or white, but sometimes there is some gray area, and we need to understand this type of things.
The best example of that is drinking tea. There are like tons of articles if drinking tea is good for you. And then after a couple of months, there's another article, drinking tea is bad for you. So I still don't know if drinking tea is good or bad for you.
You know, sometimes I feel that for those articles, it's kind of like the industry is just paying for someone to do an article about it or to do advertising. So that's somehow sometimes a risk as well. So going back to the topic you were raising, Romain, about how science is not a kind of like fixed knowledge and it's something that's growing. I have heard from other friends involved in the medical sector that as there was such an urgency with this crisis, and there still is, to tackle it down, there has been a bit of irresponsibility of some science magazines, because they have, normally they would publish an article after the peer review. And I know that there has been some articles that they have been published without the peer review. So have you heard anything about that?
Yes, so there is some what's called a web archive. So it's called archive or bioarchive, when scientists could publish an article directly to make it available for the broad audience of other scientists. And that's what we do, it's normal. But the problem is there are some articles that were published in this archive without peer review, and they were taken as granted. So for example, one that was saying that the coronavirus was produced using HIV sequences and these kind of things. And then the good thing is with a social network, like on Twitter or Reddit, it was easy for scientists that work on these topics to discuss and to detect what was the problem of these studies. And then the study was retracted by the archive.
Do you think that because it is very, because like you said, science is not only black and white, and that there is this interpretative moment in it. Do you think there are parts of this situation right now, from your perspective, which will be which can only be evaluated in 5 years or something like that, because you need more data and you need more evaluation?
No, it's really depend of the data, what you are looking, and the question. So some you need really few data, and you have very strong statistical method to say this, and sometimes it's a bit more blurry, and you need more step back to see.
Okay.
I guess always the risk is that it's so easy to propagate fake news, but then to actually retell the truth. So when it's a kind of trendy fake news and everyone is believing that, and I guess it's very difficult for the people who are more technical when they try to kind of to unlie the lie in a way, and because when people have an idea in their minds and then they tell them it was a lie, then it's never as trendy.
Yeah.
Like the news correcting the one that was very polemical. So But also, Romana, I would like to ask you, because with the new medical treatment possibilities, with the inclusion of artificial intelligence, well, I don't really know much about it, and I find it fascinating, and I guess some of our audience and other speakers are also fascinated with the idea. But I wanted to know if the pandemic has somehow accelerated the possibility of including artificial intelligence in medical research.
It's a big question. I think there was already, before the pandemic, really a big jump into artificial intelligence, with a lot of startups that emerge and companies that also developing, like a department working on artificial intelligence. And it could be used in analyzing millions of documents, or analyzing big images, like if you have scans, or, and yeah, a lot of different things. And also all the genetics data that is becoming available. So we can have like more precise treatment with precision medicine. So like drugs that could work in one patient, but not in another one because of the genetic background. And then we will be able to have a more precise target.
So regarding the precise target, wouldn't be a possibility, for example, if medical insurance have your genetic data to somehow give you a more expensive insurance because you have a certain gene? Would that be a possibility of the future?
That's could be, but it's yeah, it's ethical data, and for the moment they don't have genetic data for sure. So,
well, thankfully.
Yeah, I cannot say about this, but exactly. So, but yeah, I hope it's not the case. Yeah.
So continuing with the technological development, I wanted to ask Giuseppe if online teaching can really replace the experience of in-person lessons.
Well, the problem is that we moved from the classroom to online. Then we went to the two extreme, and that doesn't work, because in class you have some element that you don't have online, and you learn, but also you learn to react. You know, the student have to also learn to socialize. They learn also that, and to teach only one online or teach only in classroom now, they are too extreme. I think in future, well, there was before coronavirus, the classroom was already blending with the online resource, above all, like mentioned languages. Then I think we have to see the online kind of study in connection with the classroom. And then, in fact, we talk about blended learning, you know, to mix the two elements. And one element that can be, I thought, in the future will be the flipped classroom, where in reality you could have in the class, the teacher can give something to do at home, meaning watch a video, learn the lesson. And then when you are in class, you do your homework. In this way, thinking with math, you study at home the description of the equation, how to resolve it. And then in class, you do the exercise where the teacher can interact with you and will improve. I think this will be the future, this kind of blending the two things, and maybe more concentrating classroom to do things. Why online you can just have the information. And this, I think, also will be very useful for disadvantaged children, because they don't have the support at home, because maybe they don't speak the language where they live, or is not their first language, or they don't have the education of the children. Then I think if we see positively, but not as only one or only the other, I think it's the blend. And the synergy of the two will be amazing. Like we see, no? Because I think even as an artist, when you do your research, you discover immediately if someone has already done what you have, your original idea, you discover. No? There is a lot that online can help. Of course, there is the problem of the fake news also when you search online, even for your work, but you have to understand to search always for the right source. You know, I read newspaper, then fake news, really, I never got it, the concept, because I don't use Facebook. Then there is no fake news coming to me because I read a newspaper, I watch the BBC, you know, they can make mistake, but at least I know there is a serious source. Is a mistake, it's not a fake news. Then I think we have to see the potentiality of online and the dangers as well.
You said that you talked about disadvantaged children. I mean, it's like a big debate that some children are like not only because of their development, like being needing this physical school as a school to as an adolescent, for example, but also that that some don't have laptops at home or something like that. So do you think how can we compensate for the way the pandemic has disrupted students' access to their education? Or will this be like the Guardian said, like a almost lost generation or something like that?
Yeah, there will be always the privilege that they lost less than the disadvantage. And we'll see how long it will be, because already, yes, they lost quite a lot. Luckily, the first 3 months, the first term was in school, at least in England. I don't know in other countries. Then at least how is it structured here? The first term is the most important as bulk. And now maybe we go back, and then there will be what I suppose, what will happen, there is like a sort of regression that we open maybe the 8th of March, and well, we should open the 8th of March. And then I think the class will become like old fashioned, will be more concentrated, you know, the online thing will disappear for a while because there is a need to be traditional in this sense, because the two extreme are the online, only online is it's not enough. And it also depends on the age. I think online at university is an advantage sometimes, you know, depend on the subject matter. Of course, if you have a laboratory science, it would be a nightmare not to do online. But, you know, it depends also from the age, because there is the positive thing, I can enroll in America without going at university. And now could be. And there are some elements very, very interesting as well, opportunities.
Yeah.
So before we go to the next question, I would like to mention some people in the chat. So Bora Girls has sent their greetings. Christopher Pearson is saying hello and thank you for the fascinating discussion insights. Then Ana Luisa Rodriguez is saying, that's a good perspective, Giuseppe. I'll be pleased if my son's school will have this approach in the future. And I also wanted to apologize for Parizad because she had to go back to her work at BBC Persian, and that's why she had to leave early. And now maybe Natalie would like to continue with the questions.
Yes, so we talked about digitalization in the educational field, but generally for like a question for all the participants, like Ludmila, you talked about it a little bit in the beginning. How has this increased digitalization impact your practice as artists or as scientists?
Well, I was always I like drawing and painting, but I wanted to change as well because now it's easier to share your artwork if it's a digital media. So I did a some motion, for example, when I was in lockdown, because now I'm working, so I feel different. And I presented in the Alteras Festival, and it was a thank you for the NHS. But yes, I think when you are an artist as well, you like to experiment with different medias, and then, you know, you discover new things that you like it, or maybe, you know, maybe you sometimes you fail, but it's a good that you keep carry on, no? But I think everyone change, even though if you keep going with the same media. But oh no, let's see in the future what I'm going to do. But at the moment, I think I will go for the 3D animation. I think it's fun, and I would like to share more my work with others that only sell, you know, paintings or drawings.
Thank you. I have a question for Romain that is maybe, yeah, so are we better prepared for the future pandemics? Do you think that we learn something valuable?
Yes, I think yes, there's definitely. So the so basically in 1 year we were able to get the vaccine, which is really impressive. So that's one thing. And also the development, all the genetics, the genomics of the virus that were developed. So we learned something definitely.
Also in terms like of how to process data, like how to process data which come up in a pandemic, and how to evaluate them in a certain way.
Yes, I would say so. It's also the big collaboration between the public academia and the private companies, and also the collaboration between countries. That we're able to share genetic data of the virus.
Do you think that that would have been like more difficult if the countries wouldn't have shared this data so quickly?
Yes, definitely. For example, in UK, we are sequencing a lot of variants of virus. So that's why we are able to identify whether there is a new strain of the virus that came up. That's something really impressive. And also it's important to share this information between countries. So to identify whether there is no hotspot of variants.
So going up with the technological developments, I'm seeing a question in the chat from Cesar Baraca, who is saying, do you think the current expansion of online arts will continue after the epidemic, and in fact has widened the audience of people that would not have normally explore access to art or theater or etc.? I don't know if there's any artists who would like to expand on this matter.
I think we have the new media, but now I think the normal audience has done so much progress in their use of the new media, in the sense with communication and so on. I think now they will understand more maybe of these new things you see sometimes in museum, because there is sometimes a gap, an age gap. I remember a beautiful example of the Royal Academy for David Hockney exhibition, where he showed paintings made with the iPad. And there was a child of 6 explained to the father everything. And the father was really fascinated, listened to the child explain how David Hockney did the piece, because the father didn't know. Sometimes, you know, you pretend, but the father didn't know at all. Well, the child knew how to do it. And I think now this gap maybe is not so evident, because you start to use a lot the internet and you discover other things. Then I think like every war, everything goes so fast that also the art will be, will change as well. The perception of the art will change. Will be more familiar for a lot of people, I think, respect before. Also because a lot of modern art express the terrible future. No, we are in we are part of a group for ecology. Then we see that as element, and now we saw that our reality was terrible and our civilization was in danger. Then what looks like fake or impossible future now is almost our past, that we just have one moment of crisis and we maybe move on. And I think people change quite a lot.
So thank you, Giuseppe. I'm seeing another question in the chat for Paul saying, how have you experienced the impact of the pandemic within the tourist industry?
Sorry, just on mute. Obviously it's been decimated. Visitor numbers to the venue I work at just plummeted overnight, of course, as travel was restricted. We get a lot of visitors from mainland Europe, which ebbs and flows of different religious festivals, for example, happen in different areas. We'll get people who are on holiday at those times coming over. So we'll see, each country in Europe will have an influx of a great deal of visitors from that country. The next week, it'll be from another country. So there's a constant flow of people from all over, and from all over the world as well, of course. And that just was wiped out almost overnight. We still had, last year travel was permitted from most places with some restrictions, of course. And it was possible for people to move around, but then the restrictions in this country prevented people from being able to, or it was the last thing that anyone wanted to do was to go and visit a tourist site. So we found it was really just a sort of domestic market that we were surviving on. It was most people, even if they had travelled over here, weren't really tending to visit many places. Is there anything else I could expand on? Any questions related to that?
So I was wondering if anyone has a last question before we close so that we don't overextend in time.
I have one last question for all of you. What did get on your nerves the most during this last year?
For me, is when you meet people who don't respect the rules, so they are in denial, and really annoy me quite a lot.
Romain, what about you?
Yeah, it's really the same, and the fake news. So people that are saying things that I know it's not true, but they just keep saying it.
How do you encounter it? Like when somebody gives you, because I find this so difficult, like to talk to somebody in a good friend, a mom, a dad, whatever, like second uncle.
Yeah, well, I try not to, for example, to convince, but try to understand why they're thinking this way and how they come to this conclusion, and then I just leave it like this.
Mm-hmm. In Germany, you have a whole movement who is called Querdenker, so the people who think against things, and it's very they have a lot of demonstrations, had a lot of demonstrations.
And for you, Paul?
I found people jogging was very stressful. I hope there's no joggers watching, but I just found my experience, just so many people running and just not being, it's probably they're so wrapped up in getting their personal best, because obviously a lot of people were really taking it seriously. You could see by, you know, the clothes they were wearing and the behavior. You'd be walking down the street and you'd see someone running towards you, and you could see this person is going to get very, very close to me. And we're finding going out for walks daily, you just walk in the middle of the road, there's still cars about. And sometimes you'd be walking towards people, there'd be some people approaching you, you'd move to one side to give them some space, and a jogger would just come brushing past, brushing your shoulder and darting between the two groups who are obviously trying to respect each other, and someone would just come and blatantly disregard that. I found it very stressful. You know, you're feeling the pressure because, of course, anyone who's running is breathing out very heavily, and there's been evidence. It seemed at the start of the pandemic, people thought it was touching objects where the transmission, I can't remember the technical term for it, but the virus would be on an item that you bought from the shops, and that's how you contract it. But the research from Spain, I think especially, has proven that it's the main means of transmission is by aerosol. So it's very minute particles of moisture that people are breathing out that are suspending in the air, which are perhaps the biggest danger. So even though we're outside, it still seems like an incredible worry when you see someone behaving like that. It might sound silly, but obviously we still don't know how we're going to be affected by all this. So something seemingly as inconsequential as that could be, you know, feels quite important, because we'll only know the truth of, you know, what was dangerous, what wasn't, after this is all over.
Ludmila, what would you like to highlight?
Well, it was very annoying, you know, the videos about the hospital, that empty hospital. The hospital is not empty. It's like the patients are inside of the ward, so they are isolated, of course. So I think it's very unconscious to do that, because then it's like you are making fake news and trying to make people think that it's no virus, but it is, because I can see the patient dying, and it's quite tough. So I don't want no one go through that. So yeah, it was very annoying to see that many videos with empty hospitals.
So before we close, I wanted to read some greetings of Mercedes Lachman, saying thank you to the opportunity of participating of this exchange of the pandemic issues. So I don't know if Natalie would like to add anything else before I close.
No, go for it.
Okay, well, I wanted to thank you first to our guest speakers and all of the people who have been watching us tonight, and the ones who are going to watch it afterwards, for having this time with us and sharing our lockdown experiences. That for sure is something we're not going to forget in life when we go back to normality. I think it has been a broad and vast conversation from different topics and industries that have somehow been kind of like more emblematic during this pandemic. So we've gone through artificial intelligent possibilities in medical treatments, to the educational sector, hospitality, tourism, journalism in times of the post-truth, and of course, and the most important maybe for us that we're artists, it's the idea of how to keep on creating, nevertheless, that we're going through one of the probably the biggest global crisis humanity has ever experienced. And I do think it's important to keep on reflecting on the role of the arts, because the art has a lot to give to humanity. So having said that, I think we can say goodbye for tonight to the next event of Alteras. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye.